All right, last problem, and I'm going to make a real effort to write very small for this one. We are going to do this problem in two different ways. This one I do think is pretty challenging, so again, make sure you watch the video fully and have questions for me ready on Monday. So that we can definitely go over anything you have questions on at that time. So, all right, let's start with the left. What I'm going to do with the left is I see this 1 plus cosine theta on the bottom. What I want to do is see if I can kind of change that in some way. So the best way I know how to do that is to multiply by 1 minus cosine theta. And what that does for me is it gives me the squared on top. But then it also, when you FOIL, is going to give you 1 minus cosine squared theta on the bottom. And that provides us the opportunity to switch this to a sine squared theta and see what we can do with this. And I'm already writing too big, I know that. All right, so now what I'm going to do is rewrite the bottom as a sine squared theta and then I want you to notice that both the numerator and the denominator have a squared. So what I'm going to do next is kind of make one big fraction that's being squared instead of just the numerator and just the denominator, which looks like this. 1 minus cosine theta over sine of theta, whole thing is now squared. Okay. Okay, next, what I notice is that in my problem on the right, I have two separate quantities, and right now I have one quantity on the left, so I'm going to try to fix that by splitting my fraction. So I have 1 over sine of theta minus cosine theta over sine theta. Okay, because when you have the same denominator, if we put this back together, you would just have 1 minus cosine theta over sine of theta. So we just did the reverse of that. You still have that squared there. All right, so now what? Well, let's see what we can do with this. 1 minus sine of theta, or excuse me, 1 over sine of theta, you know is cosecant theta. And that's good since there's a cosecant theta over here. And cosine over sine is cotangent theta. So that's also good because we have a cotangent theta on the other side. The issue is that these two are switched. So these are really the same thing. I'm going to show you why they're the same thing. The reason they're the same is really because cosecant theta minus cotangent theta squared is just cosecant theta minus cotangent theta twice. All right, so you already know that squaring something is something multiplied by itself. So what's the purpose of me doing this? Well, basically what we're going to do in order to switch the order of the cosine and the cotangent to get it the way we want over here, essentially we're going to take a -1 out of each of those expressions. So if I take a -1 out of my first expression, the cosecant becomes negative, the cotangent becomes positive. Same thing with the second expression here. Take out a -1. The cosecant will become negative. The cotangent will become positive. And then when you multiply your -1 times your -1, you just get a 1. And now you have this times this. They're the same thing, so they can be written as negative cosecant theta plus cotangent theta squared. And then the last thing you need to do is just switch your order. So put cotangent first. And there we go. Ta-da! All right, so that's the first way to do this one. Now let's come over to the right-hand side, and we are going to work with the right side. So I think the most obvious thing to do with the right side is to FOIL that. So let's start off by doing that. Make sure you rewrite the left-hand side for every step that you do. All right, so when you FOIL, you're going to have cotangent squared theta minus 2 cotangent theta cosecant theta plus cosecant squared theta. All right, next. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change all of these to sines and cosines because I noticed that my problem on the left just is cosines. So let's get rid of all these cotangents and cosecants. Cotangent squared is cosine squared over sine squared. Minus 2 cotangent is cosine over sine. Cosecant is 1 over sine. Cosecant squared is 1 over sine squared. So what you should notice here is that all of your denominators are sine squareds because sine theta times sine theta is sine squared theta. So let's combine all of these into one fraction, which is good because the other side is all one fraction as well. So that'll be cosine squared theta minus 2 cosine theta plus 1 all over sine squared theta. Okay. Next, this is something that we can factor. Multiplies to 1, adds to negative 2. That would be negative 1 and negative 1. So cosine theta minus 1, cosine theta minus 1, which is cosine theta minus 1 squared. Okay, next, another thing I think people are going to start to see, oh, I know what to do now. We're going to change that sine squared theta to a 1 minus cosine squared theta. All right, something else that I'm going to do just to help with our cancellation is just how we showed over here that cosecant theta minus cotangent theta squared is the same as cotangent theta minus cosecant theta squared. For the same reason, by taking out these negative ones, we can say that cosine theta minus 1 squared is the same as 1 minus cosine theta squared. Okay, and again, that's because if you write it twice and you pull out your negative ones, it becomes the same thing. All right, so what we're going to do now is we can factor the bottom and then we can have some cancellation occur. So 1 minus cosine squared will factor to 1 plus cosine theta, 1 minus cosine theta, And now you can see that you have a 1 minus cosine theta on the bottom, and you have two of them on the top. So I'm just going to basically cancel out one of the ones on the top with the one on the bottom. So I'll have 1 minus cosine theta on the top, which is what I want, and 1 plus cosine theta on the bottom, which is also what I want. So it looks like we're done. And there you go. That's it.